in. It's the 5-5 edition. We go 2 and 3 last night as we build these early in the day. So we want to make sure that you're constantly paying attention to what's going on throughout the day. And normally we start with just me, my big ass head, my ugly face, and whoever's behind me. In this case, it's Pascal Siakam. Great Russo name, by the way. Pascal Siakam. But I did want to show you this. Now, this isn't just to brag about the 2-0 night that we had in the NHL. It's to show you how well this Bet Pro tool is working for us. Now, when I create these videos early in the morning, our Bet Pro information is not up yet. As you see, available 11 Central Time. So about noon Eastern, you start to see our Bet Pro tool populate. We're going to give you a free week. I know you want to get to the 5-5 and all the bets and all this other stuff, but this is how you can win. All of us on the Stokastic team, on the Odd Shopper team, we're using this tool. You see people in our Discord giving out Bet Pro tool plays. It's working. We want to give you a week free right away. I had one last night, Emmanuel quickly under 14.5 points. We smashed it. We absolutely smashed it. And I knew to bet that from Bet Pro. And I gave it out on the Discord and said, hey, if you're not, so even the Discord where you get a first free week, I just wanted to show you the Bet Pro tool before we begin. Okay? That's all. That's it. Just a vendor, just a quick little thing. Now we can start the clock. 5 bets in 5 minutes. Let us begin. Speaking of Pascal Siakam, got a really good shot here. This is plus 370, just under 4-1 or north of 350, however you want to look at it. Pascal Siakam to lead the game in scoring. Let me just make sure I got this right. Yeah, I get it. Jaylen Brown now without Jason Tatum is the odds-on favorite, and rightfully so, but he's not guaranteed a 35-point night just because Tatum is out. In fact, Boston is most likely going to do their best to spread. Doesn't mean that Brown can't hit 25 or 26, but I'm not touching that 28.5-point line for him. I would rather look at plus 370 as far as Pascal Siakam moving into the leading scorer of the game at a great number. Look, Van Vliet burns us. Gary Trent burns us. That's fine. It ain't going to be Malcolm Brogdon. We know that. All right, let's get to a typical points prop here. Chris Stapps.
What is happening, everybody? And if you're just watching the football show, guess where I am? Right back here. But now we're talking about MMA, doing the MMA Live Before Lock show. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored by PrizePicks today. And already see, we've got a question in our Discord channel from 1.6. He wants to know who our favorite PrizePicks options are. So we're going to be talking about them a little bit as we go through. But if you guys want to be playing where 1.6 is over at PrizePicks, sign up using our link. You're going to get 1 free month of the Stokastic Plus Platinum package, which covers all the tools we have for MMA, but also all the other sports, basketball, football, baseball starting back up in a couple of months, all of that covered over at Stokastic, and you get 1 month of that for free when you sign up using our link for PrizePicks. But, oh wait, there's more. There's even more than that, Josh. If you thought that was it, that's not it. You also get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit when you sign up at PrizePicks using our link. So talking a little bit more about them later on in the show. But Josh, how you liking this card? It's 15 fights. None of them dropped out, and it's pretty stacked.
Yeah, definitely better than the fight card last week that we broke down. 11 fights. Not really too much only one dog besides the main event one. So there was a 47-way chop in the big GPP. There are plenty of ways to get different. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll find out. The one thing I will say, luckily, 13 of the 15 fights are scheduled to end inside the distance, which is good because we're in Brazil. You never want the fight to go to the judges in Brazil, especially with these Brazilian fighters. So besides maybe like Texas, Brazil might be like the worst spot to go to the judges.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting card. So, by the way, guys, any questions you have, once again, add us in the Discord channel. YouTube questions, throw those in. You guys have super chats. We'll answer everything as we go. Since it's 15 fights, not going to be able to break down every single one individually. But what we are going to be doing is just kind of highlighting some of our favorite fighters and fights to target across different tiers. And that's what I think is going to be the best way for a massive slate like this to give you guys all the information you need to really build your lineups as we go. So I want to start by talking about the top end, guys. And there's a lot of them this week. But let's kind of try to talk about the very top with Jailton Almeida, who is just a monster favorite, monster favorite against Shamil Abdurakhimov. And you understand why if you look at all of the numbers here. First of all, Shamil has a takedown defense of sub 50%. That's not great. And if there's somebody you don't want to have shit takedown defense against, it's probably Jailton Almeida, who is built like, if I could be built like anybody, believe it or not, I wouldn't choose myself. I might choose Jailton Almeida. That might be my ideal physique. I keep the same face, but I keep like the Brazilian body. It would look a little weird from a shading purpose, but Jailton Almeida is for very good reason, the most expensive fighter on the card. His odds of finishing inside the first round, depending what book you look at, are anywhere from -180 to -210. But how hard is it going to be to get all the way up to the $9,700 salary? And how is that going to inhibit the amount of him you get to in large field tournaments, Josh?
Yeah, and that's a problem because he has 3 wins inside the distance, but he hasn't scored higher than 117, I believe. And if he puts up 117 tonight, that's a great score. I think he's hit 120 once or something like that. But if he puts up, say, 117 today, is it going to be good enough at 9,700 to be optimal on a 15-fight slate? I don't know. But the thing is, right, he's a monster at 205. He also fights at heavyweight. He's giving up 30 pounds here. And I've seen people say, oh, the weight is going to be different. He fought Parker Porter, who came in at 266. He had a cut to the heavyweight limit, and he ragdolled him. So I don't know. I think I wouldn't force him in. This is kind of, I wouldn't force him into my lineup, but if I'm building and I happen to get there, I think that's fine. Of the top tier, though, I think he's easily the best option just based off metrics. There's a case to be made. If you don't put him in your lineup, you can make a nice mid-range build where you don't even have to get into the 9K tier. But if you do, there's plenty of dogs where you can still make a comfortable lineup.
And for me, there's a couple of issues with paying all the way up to Jailton. First, obviously, he's just crazy expensive at 9,700. But there aren't that many cheap fighters I feel great about. I don't love Neil Magny today. I don't love Lauren Murphy. Zara Fireman's terrible. Obviously, if we're playing Almeida, we're not going to be getting to Abdurakhimov. So with all that in mind, I'm going to be underweight to the field to him, and I'm going to definitely be shitting my pants for the first minute because the odds of him getting the first minute finish bonus, I get that it's a very high risk, but at the same time too, I very rarely am overweight to these fighters that are super, super expensive. We've got Almeida projected for nearly 40% ownership at a $9,700 price tag. And I think you hit it on there before too. He could put up a massive score. He could score 120 fantasy points and not land in the optimal lineup for a couple of reasons. Number one, it could be hard to pay up for him. Well, it is hard to pay up for him. Then point two, 13 out of the 15 fights for the slate, like Josh said, are favored to finish inside the distance. If you just get fighters who are, like Thiago Moises, he's alive for a first round submission. Gabriel Monfim, he's live for a first round submission. Johnny Walker, he could get a very quick knockout against Paul Craig. Any of these guys in the low 9K, high 8K range that also put up scores over 100 points, probably makes it difficult for Almeida to make it into the optimal lineup. So cash games, go ahead and play him for tournaments. I'm going to be a little bit underweight to the field on him. And it does seem like we're kind of on the same page. Not a fade for me or anything, but somebody I think makes sense to be a little bit underweight too. Now, walking through the next tier of fighters, and let's group these together. Let's go with Cody Stamann, Gilbert Burns, Jessica Andrade, Josiane Nunez. Of those fighters in the 9K range, so going from the Stamann price to the Nunez price, who is the highest priority for you of those fighters?
I think it's going to be either Jessica Andrade or Gilbert Burns, right? Jessica Andrade, when she loses, it's just to Valentina Shevchenko, and it's quick. Lauren Murphy, this is a fight where she's going to have a power advantage, a wrestling advantage. It's a 3-round fight, but we've seen Jessica Andrade put up massive scores in 3-round fights, just, taking everyone down, letting them get back up, taking them back down. I think she has finish equity here. Lauren Murphy is tough. I think that's her best attribute besides, her nickname Lucky, which got her some lucky split decisions, getting her a title fight where she got absolutely murked by Shevchenko, but who hasn't? I think this is a really good matchup for Andrade. Gilbert Burns as well. I think, Neil Magny doesn't get the respect he deserves, but Gilbert Burns is an unbelievably good submission grappler. Like Neil Magny, pretty good on the mat, but generally when it comes down to like submission grappling, the better grappler is going to be better. It's just like the way it goes in jiu-jitsu. So I think Burns has some finishing upside there, but Magny likes to stay on the outside. He likes to dance. So Burns, might have a little bit of trouble getting into the pocket there, just because he's, from a height perspective, he's small for 170. And Magny's just going to have a massive reach and height advantage. So Jessica Andrade for me. Cody Stamann, it would just be a contrarian play for me. Like, I like him as a fighter. I think, he has, I don't think he's going to finish. Like, this is one of the fights that is favored to go to the decision here. He has some wrestling upside, but he doesn't use it too much. He likes to get lulled into these like slow pace type deals. So for me, it's Andrade or Burns. Nunez, on the other hand, like, she could knock out, Farine, but like, she's 5'2", and she probably could make 125, but she fights up at 145. Farine is way taller, has a bigger reach. Does she have the ability to keep her on the outside? Probably not, but like, Farine's biggest weakness is on the mat. I don't see Nunez wrestling. So for me, outside Almeida is Andrade or Burns.
Yeah, I'm with you. So for me, it is going to be Jessica Andrade. I'm going to tell you why in a second, but first, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we just got the most important super chat this channel has ever seen. Saul Goodman just left his super chat. Thank you both for not being anything like Eric Lindquist. You're welcome. And I know Saul does like to troll Eric on Twitter, but there's a couple of issues with that. Number one, Eric now has Saul blocked on Twitter. But then the other part also is that Eric himself has gotten booted from Twitter, which rightfully so. He's a menace to society. He should not be on that platform anymore. We're all safer with him no longer on it. So, Saul, thank you for the super chat. It's appreciated. I agree with you 110%. And it's also important that Eric is in the YouTube channel. He's able to engage with you and see the comments that you make that he can't see on Twitter anymore because he's banned from Twitter and he has you blocked. So very important. Thank you for the super chat.
What do you get banned for Twitter for? Making egregious, like, exclamation point takes about someone scoring like 8 points in the first quarter?
Revealing himself to children. Just a lot of DM mishaps.
Yeah.
Normal stuff. Like, he's
Tough
been
scene.
suspended from, he's been suspended from the company multiple times for that as well. We keep telling him, Eric, age of consent, 18. And he's like, all right, whatever.
Gotta go knock on the neighbor's doors, let him know he's a sex offender. Yeah.
Yeah. But we know now. Yeah. Elon Musk's in charge of Twitter, and they take these things much more seriously now, right? It's a new regime. They don't take kindly to that. And also, good point by Jules Malone. He also did make a bomb threat. This is true. Something related to TJ McConnell. He made a bomb threat. Can't have him on the platform anymore. Menace to society. Super chat from, I forgot. I wanted to talk about Jessica Andrade. Then I'll answer the next super chat. Eric comes up. I go crazy eyed, and it's like, a bull seeing red. Jessica Andrade, just the output is insane for her. And Lauren Murphy is very, very difficult to finish. Very difficult to finish. As tough as they come, I don't think it matters. Jessica Andrade could put up a massive score in a 3-round decision because of this output. She lands over 6 significant strikes per minute. She lands about 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. And she's relentless with the wrestling. She has no issue. She fails once. She's going to keep at it. And she has no issue attempting many, many takedowns. So what's the fight she had against Tecia Torres, for instance? This fight was a few years ago, but I think it's a pretty good barometer of what could happen against a tough fighter when it goes to decision. So Jessica Andrade did not finish Tecia Torres, but she attempted 12 takedowns and landed 10 of them. 92 significant strikes, nothing crazy, but still ends up scoring well over 100 fantasy points in that matchup because she lands 10 takedowns, 7 minutes of control time. That added up with some of the significant strikes. That's the kind of volume you see from Jessica Andrade when fights go to decision sometimes. So amongst those fighters we were just talking about, Nunez, Andrade, Burns, Stamann, I'm going to be prioritizing Jessica Andrade. All right, the next question we have here, Corey Randall, super chat. Greg, Why are you against the Haitian sensation? Many is a dog and got reach and is no slouch on the grounds. Burns, in my opinion, best days are behind him. So I'm not against Neil Magny as... So I guess, like, in general, I like Neil Magny, but I don't think this is the best matchup for him. And here is the main reason why. He does not have great takedown defense, and that's an issue against Gilbert Burns. If you get taken down by Gilbert Burns, you're stuck. And a couple things happen. Number one, you're very live to be submitted. And Neil Magny, by the way, the takedown defense is only 57%. That's fairly low. And that's why if you look at some of the fights that he's had against, say, like Michael Chiesa, for instance, he was taken down 4 times by Michael Chiesa. And we've seen that happen in some fight. He got taken down twice by Li Jingliang, who does not have nearly as good wrestling or grappling as Gilbert Burns does. And I do think there's a spot where Gilbert Burns is live for a submission. And then even if Magny is to end up winning this fight, I don't think he's going to score all that well, because I do think that Gilbert Burns is going to try to push the pace. I do think Gilbert Burns is going to try to wrestle and grapple. And given the takedown defense of Neil Magny, at some point, Gilbert Burns is going to get this to the ground. And that's going to be time that Neil Magny's not going to be able to score fantasy points, because he's going to be stuck if he's underneath Gilbert Burns. So he's a big underdog in this spot. You can make a case maybe the line is a little bit too wide, but I do expect Gilbert Burns to win. And even if Magny wins, I don't really love his scoring opportunity.
Yeah, and if he does win, like, it's just going to be a striking-based decision. I don't think he's going to want to go to the ground with Gilbert Burns. Like, Neil Magny has wrestling upside, but not in this matchup. Like, Gilbert Burns, one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in the UFC. So, like, he has a chance to get reversals there. So, like, Magny's going to stick to the outside, pump his jab. Problem is, skinny legs. Burns will get on the inside, take him to the mat eventually. Even if Magny wins a striking-based decision, he's going to put up 70 points. You know what I mean? He's not going to knock out Burns. I mean, maybe. It's fighting. It could happen, but...
We've got Tokyo Swan says that he thinks Magny could sub Burns. I would be stunned if that happens. There's a big grappling difference between Gilbert Burns and Neil Magny. I would be really surprised if Magny was able to submit him. And by the way, also, I hear you, because in the chat, people are saying Burns is old. Yeah, he is old. So is Magny, though. I tend to think Magny is more washed than Burns is, because while they're, fairly similar in age, Gilbert Burns is a year older. Gilbert Burns is 36 or 36, and Neil Magny is 35. Here's the difference, though. Gilbert Burns, 25 career professional fights. Neil Magny, 37. So that's 12 more fights. Neil Magny, a little bit more wear and tear on him. And I know that Gilbert Burns has been hurt, but he was knocked out at 155 pounds. It was a weight class he should never have been fighting in against Dan Hooker. And then he got finished by Kamaru Usman, right? Like, it's not something where I'm too concerned about the durability. But let's move on and talk about the next price range of fighters. And we just went through the mid-ish to high 9K range, but let's talk about the lower 9K range and some other fighters that really have finishing opportunity. So talking about this group of guys now: Gregory Rodriguez, Thiago Moises, Ihor Potieria, Gilbert Monfim. Got 2 Monfim brothers on the card. And then Johnny Walker and Simon Oliveira. I think all of these fighters have a lot of finishing equity. So how are you parsing who you want to prioritize in tournaments amongst this group?
This is the toughest range, I think, on the card, because Ihor Potieria, I don't think he's UFC talent, but he's fighting a ghost of Shogun Rua. You know what I mean? Like, Potieria got knocked out by Nikolai Negamarianu in his UFC debut, who has the best nickname in the UFC, but he didn't bring it along. It was the Transylvanian Pain Train. He needs to bring that back. But Potieria went for bust in the first round and got tired, got finished. If he does that against Shogun, I think he can finish him, but if he doesn't, Shogun's going to wrestle. Poteria's going to get tired. I honestly think Shogun can win a decision here if he survives the first round. We move to, I think Thiago Moises is my favorite in this range, just because he has submission equity up in the first round here. The guy he's fighting is he has 1 fight in LFA, and then he was on the Brazilian regional scene. It's just a level of competition thing with Thiago Moises. His resume is way more impressive than Costa's. Gregory Rodriguez is an interesting one, because the dude is a very good wrestler. He's a very good submission grappler, but he falls in love with his striking. And Bruno Ferreira is built like a fire hydrant for the division. So he might be tough to get taken down. If Rodriguez falls in love with his hands and goes into a striking battle, Bruno can crack. Rodriguez has been hurt before. He doesn't have the best cardio, but Greg Rodriguez also has finishing upside here. Then you move on to Bonfim. Like, Munir Lazez is one of the more popular dogs just because he has a good resume. He's survived against Al Hassan, you know what I mean? Then you get to Johnny Walker, Paul Craig, which is just going to be an absolute meme if it gets out of the first round. Johnny Walker.
Sorry to cut you off. It's going to be a meme no matter what, because all of Johnny Walker's fights are stupid. All of Paul Craig's fights are stupid. You know, Paul Craig's fight against Volkan Oezdemir, he did nothing but pull guard. And every time he got hit, he pretended he got hurt and fell down, hoping that Oezdemir would jump into his guard. Oezdemir looked like shit in that fight, but he won just because Paul Craig didn't really do anything. So it's my favorite fighter in this price range is actually Johnny Walker, just because I think he could absolutely starch Paul Craig. He's also an absolute fucking idiot, and anything is live to be like, he had to miss a significant amount of time because he blew out his shoulder doing the worm after knocking out. Who was it that he knocked out where he did the worm afterwards?
It was the guy who fought a heavyweight. Now he got cut. I forget his name.
Oh, Justin Ledet.
Yeah.
He fought Justin Ledet, knocks him out with like a weird spinning back fist, does the worm, blows out his shoulder. He makes horrendous decisions all the time when he's fighting, but he's super athletic and super talented. I think just based on the physicality difference, it's going to be hard for Paul Craig to get this to the mat. And Paul Craig has been saying in interviews this week that he wants to knock Johnny Walker out on the feet. Like, if Paul Craig is going to strike with Johnny Walker, I mean, that's just a death sentence for him. So amongst these guys, I think that Johnny Walker has the most early finishing equity. He also probably has the most variance of any of these guys. But I love the upside of Johnny Walker and the price tag at $8,700. But sorry, what were you about to say?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, Johnny Walker, very much finish equity here. But the thing is, his fight IQ is lower than like a deer in the headlights. Like, he could like spinning back fist into a takedown right into a triangle on the mat. You know what I mean? Like, Paul Craig in that Volkan Oezdemir fight was landing double legs, but he just wasn't finishing them. He just like got in there and then fell back. He wanted to pull Volkan into guard. I think if Craig wants to wrestle here, I think maybe he can get Walker down. But the problem is, like, if Johnny Walker finds the chin once, Paul Craig's going to go flopping around like a fish. If this fight gets out of the first round, though, it's going to be a bust for GPPs, especially on the Walker side. Like, Craig could finish late and be okay, but you know, you really need a first round finish for Johnny Walker here. This range is really tough, but there's a lot of high finishing equity here.
Yeah, and we've got Nick Osteros saying training in Ireland hasn't helped Johnny. He's been more boring than ever. Well, to be clear, that he was one of the most exciting fighters for a really long, extended period of time. And his last fight against Kudalaba was a fairly crazy back and forth fight where Kudalaba, but every Johnny Walker fight is dumb. Like none of them make sense.
Kudalaba's fights. His fights are idiotic.
By the way, Johnny Walker, I thought, was outstriking Jamal Hill in their fight. Now, I know it only lasted a few minutes because Johnny Walker is having success to the feet. Jamal Hill lands like one punch, and Johnny Walker does like a cartoon fall, backflips, and gets knocked out.
I thought he was faking it at first.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. It was so weird looking that people saw the clip on Twitter and social media who are not familiar with combat sports and just like, that's fake. That can't have really happened. It did happen though, and he's just, everything he does is cartoonish looking and meme-like. So this fight is probably going to be weird, but I really do like the finishing equity of Johnny Walker. So I'm going to be taking a lot of shots on him in tournaments. Seems like you're on the same page. Now, amongst the other guys in this price range, anything else you want to talk about that stands out to you here?
I mean, it's just, you know, if you want to get Moises in there, he needs a finish. Gregory Rodriguez probably needs a finish. Just because there's so many fighters with these finishing equities, like if you're going to pay up into the 9Ks, you need over 100 points at least. So you need these finishes here. You know, Moises definitely busts without a finish here unless he just, you know, lands like 9 takedowns and has 10 minutes in control time, which we haven't seen. Gregory Rodriguez, maybe, you know, he has some wrestling equity and could get there in a decision. Just don't trust his cardio and durability. So you need a finish there. So yeah, like why pay up? Like the argument you just made, why pay up there when you can take shots on Johnny Walker for less money with probably even higher finishing equity?
Yeah. So there's a lot of fighters to have a big chance to finish on the card, which is, you know, why I'm not paying up as much for the likes of Jailton, Almeida, and Josiane Nunez, even though these are fighters that I expect to finish and expect to finish early, because there are fighters down the card who, while I don't have as much confidence that they are going to win the fight or finish early, I know a handful of them are going to, and I think that has a good chance of knocking fighters like Almeida and Nunez out of the optimal lineup. Now, we've got a fight that I think is very important to talk about in the Terrence McKinney fight, so we're going to hit on that in a second. But first, some questions we have in the Discord channel. This one from JEW. He wants to know, who's our favorite upsets for DK today? So if you had to pick one fighter that you feel best about potentially pulling off an upset, so let's just say anybody who's priced below Glover, right? Because I think if you went with Teixeira at $7,800, I don't think that's too crazy of an option. So be below him. Who are your couple of favorite fighters that you think are likely to get a victory?
Likely? So I think one of my favorite is Ismael Bonfim, which we'll talk about in a second. Yeah. I think Munir Lazez is live as well. If Shogun Rua survives the first 5 minutes and he's, he's still there in the second round, he could grind out a decision. I don't really want to rely on that. I think the other one is Bruno Ferreira. If Gregory Rodriguez falls in love with this striking, I think Ferreira is live if this is a striking battle.
For me, the answer, once again, a lot of these guys with upside, but the ones that I'm getting to the most, Ismael Bonfim. It is so hard to avoid the Bonfim and McKinney fight. McKinney fights like there is like the fight only lasts 3 minutes and you have to get a finish to win. Like that's like his mindset going into fights. And I guess for him, it kind of is the case because if he doesn't get an immediate finish, he typically ends up losing. But his fight last time out, or 2 fights ago against Drew Dober, was absolutely bonkers. That fight starts, he gets right after Drew Dober. Drew Dober, who's got maybe the biggest face and chin I've ever seen before. Like Jay Leno-esque, right? The guy's got a gigantic chin. Impossible to knock him out because of the size of his chin. But still, McKinney did some real damage to him. Knocks Drew Dober down a couple of times in the first round. Dober comes back. He knocks down McKinney a couple of times. They go back and forth. There are a million strikes landed in that. There are takedowns back and forth. There are knockdowns. The fight ends in the first round in 3 minutes. In a first round loss, McKinney scored 40 fantasy points. So that's just the pace he keeps in all of his fights. The odds of the fighter that wins this fight being in the optimal lineup, extremely high. I think this is a fight you want to have a lot of exposure to. There are the three fights I get the most exposure to today. Terrence McKinney and Ismael Bonfim, and then the 2 title fights. Glover against Jamal Hill, and then Davison Figueiredo against Brandon Moreno. Relative to salaries and the upside in those fights, those are the 3 I have the most exposure to. But once again, like Bonfim against McKinney, it's kind of similar to last week we had the Abdul Razak Al Hassan fight, which I got a little scared at the start of that one, Josh, because it was not playing out like I thought it was going to. But at the start of the second round, Abdul Razak Al Hassan ended up coming through, gets that knockout. But it's that kind of fight, one that I think is very likely whoever wins, I think is probably scoring like 115, 120 fantasy points.
Yeah, that Al Razak Al Hassan fight, man, those leg kicks. I thought he was going to have no legs, and that was it. But yeah, Terrence McKinney is the definition of kill or be killed. You know what I mean? He got sent to Narnia on the Dana White's Contender Series by Sean Woodson, who I thought maybe was a prospect, but he's very up and down in the UFC. He knocked out Matt Frivola in his UFC debut in like the first punch he threw. Sub Fariz Ayem first round, and that Drew Dober fight, like you mentioned, was nuts. A few months later, subbed Eric Gonzalez. Now here's the thing: like Ismael Bonfim has gone to decision before, which is more than you could say for Terrence McKinney. He also has some first round finishes on his card. He has 1 loss by finish. In 2014, it was a submission to Renato Moicano, who's one of the better UFC fighters. So I don't know if he can survive that Terrence McKinney onslaught here, which he may not. Like Terrence McKinney may come out and just absolutely just whitewash him in 3 minutes or whatever it is. But if he survives that first onslaught, I think he takes over. He takes over the fight. He can finish late. Goes to decision. It doesn't even matter. Like if he survives that first 3, 4, 5 minutes. I just think McKinney's going to be so gassed that Bonfim's finishing equity just goes up every minute the fight goes on.
Yeah, and once again, I think this is one where, let me look at my exposures to this fight right now. Yeah, it is in about 90% of the lineups that I've built. It's just hard for me to imagine that this fight, whoever wins, doesn't score extremely well. I favor McKinney to win, but just because of pricing, I ended up getting a little bit more exposure to Ismael Bonfim. But it's just based on pricing. I think McKinney a little bit more likely to win. But once again, play both sides of this fight. Cash games, stay away from it because there's a chance whoever loses very quickly. So wouldn't touch it in cash games. Tournaments, very, very high priority. Some more questions to get to. Let's get back to our guy 1.6, who wanted to know what we like over on PrizePicks. So have you had a chance to look at PrizePicks at all? If not,
I have it up.
All right. So let's look at it. Mike, if you wouldn't mind, can you put PrizePicks on the screen? And we could show some of the props that are up here, because there's a couple that stand out to me. The one that I think really makes sense here. Well, a couple actually in the takedown props. One, the over-under for takedowns for Glover is 2.5. Here's why I like the under. If Glover loses, he's probably getting knocked out fairly quickly. I tend to think, though, if he gets one takedown in this fight, that's a wrap. Jamal Hill does not have very much of a ground game. We saw he lost to Paul Craig. In fact, had his arm broken by Paul Craig pretty quickly. So the 2.5 takedowns for Glover, the reason I like the under is because I think he's either getting knocked out, or if he gets the takedown, I think he's finishing Jamal Hill. I also like Glover. I'm not sure what the line is now, but at least earlier in the week, I bet him plus 260 to win by submission. I think that's a pretty clear path to victory for Glover in this spot. But I like him for under 2.5 takedowns, just for the reasons I laid out before. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, he's either going to win by, if he lands that first takedown, it could be over. If he doesn't land a takedown, he's probably going to get knocked out. So yeah, I agree. We haven't even talked about that fight yet, but that's pretty much how I break it down as well.
Yeah, and we're about to talk about that one in a second. The other one, I like Jailton Almeida for over 1.5 takedowns. We talked about Abdurakimov's takedown defense before. I expect Almeida to be all over him and probably land multiple takedowns in the first round and likely finishing the fight in the first round. But Glover under 2.5 takedowns is the one that I like the most there for you 1.6 if you're still listening to us in Discord channel. Now, let's talk about the title fights, because that's kind of what's up next here. We just talked about how important it is to target the Bonfim and McKinney fight. And then we get into the mid-range. We've got Jamal Hill against Glover Teixeira. We've got Davis and Figueiredo against Brandon Moreno. When you're looking at these two fights, who are you prioritizing the most amongst this group?
I think like the Moreno-Figueiredo fight, we've seen it 3 times. And if you think someone won in that first draw, like both of them would have scored in the high 90s or low hundreds. You know what I mean? When Moreno won, he was close to 100. When Figueiredo won, he was over 100. So, it's one of those things though, like 95 points, let's say, for the winner at 8,200. Is that going to be enough? Like, there is a case to be made that it won't be. Like, on a normal card, yeah, it will be, but you have all these massive finishers here. Like, if Moreno scores 87 points in a decision victory, I'd be happy with it. Like, it won't hurt you, but I don't think it would be on the optimal, especially if some of these underdogs come through with wins. Now, I think another angle is if some of these guys in the top range bust and you have a mid-range build, that, because we just talked about like the 8,500 to the 9,000 range is filled with GPP picks, like some of these guys, it's uncomfortable to put them in because they can bust if they don't finish. But if they all finish, then you have like the mid-range where you need a finish to get into the optimal lineup. Am I going to be under the field because of that? No, because you get 5-round equity, especially for Figueiredo Moreno. That makes a big difference for these little guys, unless there's a really quick finish. But like Moreno has wrestling upside here, and I tend to favor him for DFS. Like, even if I think Figueiredo is going to win, he's a guy who relies on big moments. Moreno's a better round winner. So I think if this goes to the decision, Moreno has the advantage here. Like, Figueiredo needs a knockdown in 2 rounds, or he takes Moreno's back and controls him for most of the round. Otherwise, I think Moreno's going to be winning these rounds. I think Moreno can win by decision here. Figueiredo's probably going to be the guy who needs to finish to win.
Yeah, I tend to also favor Brandon Moreno in the fight. And so the way the fights went, the first fight at least, I came away thinking Figueiredo is better than Moreno, but it was a little bit closer than what I think a lot of people would have thought heading into the fight. The second fight, Brandon Moreno all day, right? That was not remotely competitive. Of the 3 fights they've had, clearly that was the most one-sided. Credit to Figueiredo.
Figueiredo had a really bad weight cut in that one, I think. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's and by the way, it appears he has that under control. He looked really good on the scales yesterday. He's training with Henry Cejudo and those guys out in Arizona now. And I did think he looked quite a bit better in his last fight and also on the scale. But even with that said, I thought Moreno won the last fight, at least in my opinion. I thought he looked really good in that fight. And now we've also got Figueiredo, who, as far as bantamweights go, pretty old. 35-year-old bantamweight with some issues with weight cutting. That's pretty weathered for this weight class. And then also, I'm always somebody who's going to rely on a lot of the numbers when you break down some of these fights. And Moreno lands at a higher clip, more significant strikes landed per minute. He absorbs less significant strikes per minute. Takedowns, he scores more takedowns per 15 minutes. His takedown defense is higher. All of the metrics across the board are in favor of Brandon Moreno. Everything. So I have to think that Brandon Moreno, like you said, better minute winner, somebody who's more likely to win the fight. I think Moreno should be the favorite in this spot, and not massively because this is their 4th fight. They're familiar with each other. We've seen them fight competitively, but I don't quite agree with the betting odds here. And I mean, the pricing on DraftKings also, Moreno's the cheaper of the 2. He's right around a minus 130 favorite. I think he should be more like a minus 150 or minus 160. So he's my preferred option over Davison Figueiredo, and also a fairly high priority for me. And then as for the Glover Teixeira fight against Jamal Hill, what's annoying about this fight is no matter what happens, I think it's going to look obvious in hindsight. The one thing I don't expect, and tell me if you agree or disagree, I don't expect this to be competitive. It doesn't mean I'm overly confident who's going to win, but if Glover wins, I think he gets the fight to the ground and is able to just walk through Jamal Hill's guard and sub him fairly easily. And if he doesn't get that takedown, I think he's just getting his lights put out. So I don't think this fight is going to be competitive. Of the 2 title fights, I think the Glover and Jamal Hill is a higher priority one to target than Figueiredo Moreno, because I think there's more finishing equity in the Glover and Jamal Hill fight. Do you agree with that? And do you have a lean for that?
Yeah, I don't really have a lean, and that's the problem, because like you look at the ownership here, it's pretty similar. So like no one really has a lean here. Hill coming in at 30, projected 32.9, Glover at 31.9. It's a 1% difference projected. I think ultimately, I think Glover comes in a little bit more popular just for the savings and the wrestling equity. Could Hill defend the takedowns and survive? The thing that worries me about Hill is he let Thiago Santos get into that clinch way too often. And Glover Teixeira is a better wrestler, better submission grappler than Thiago Santos. To Hill's credit, he kept getting back up. He got back up against Santos. I don't think he's going to be getting up if Glover Teixeira lands 6 takedowns. Like, if Glover gets the 6 takedowns, something went wrong. Like Glover, like broke an arm or something. He's just not telling anybody. You know what I mean? So like, I think Glover needs less than 3 takedowns to finish the fight. Now, if he can't get the fight to the ground, it may look like that Rumble Johnson Glover Teixeira fight with Glover's tooth, flying into the 3rd row. Like Hill doesn't have extreme power for 205, but we've seen, him knock people out cold. So it's hard to have a lean, because if Teixeira wasn't 43, I'd be all over Teixeira here. But he is, and we've seen him hurt by Anthony Smith, who missed weight as the backup fighter, which was kind of ridiculous. But like, if you think, Glover's chin's gone, go with Hill. I think he's going to be a more contrarian option. I think he might actually be a better option for GPPs with lower ownership. But I worry about Hill's takedown defense. Give up 6 takedowns to Santos, which Santos is a good wrestler, but if you give up that many chances to Teixeira, it's over on the mat.
Yeah, so I'm also thinking about betting Glover. Like I said, my favorite bet for this fight would actually be Glover by sub. I think that's his most clear path to victory. maybe a little bit concerned if this fight was he gets top position, wins via ground and pound. I find it very unlikely this fight is going to go the distance, especially because of the age of Glover. And, I know the fight against Yuri was very close to going to the judges' scorecards. That was also incredibly surprising. I don't remember what the line was for that to go to the distance. It didn't, but it probably should have. But this fight, I would be even more surprised if it made it to the judges' scorecards, just based on the clash of styles and just the clear advantages both these guys have. The age of Glover, if Hill lands clean on him, I expect Glover to get knocked out. If he isn't able to do that, I think Glover takes him down, submits him probably in the first round. So Glover's my preferred option in this fight. My favorite bet on him is buy sub. I'm considering the money line as well because the line keeps moving in favor of Jamal Hill. When I looked earlier, I think it had gotten to the point where Glover was at plus 125. Let me go to best fight odds and see what it is now because I've been doing shows all afternoon, and so plus 120 is where it's at right now. The best line available on Glover is plus 127. I think this is a fight where I slightly favor Glover whenever it's a striker versus wrestler grappler. I think there's less variance in the wrestling grappling side, so I tend to lean with it. I think the line should be flipped. I think Glover should be the slight favorite and Jamal Hill the slight underdog. More exposure for me with Glover in the main event than Jamal Hill. Both of them, though, fighters I want exposure to. Would you play either in a cash game, though?
I would maybe consider Glover just because he has wrestling upside, but again, like his floor is very low here. So, like with 15 fights, maybe not. There's some guys I'd rather play. Like I'd rather go to the other title fight for cash games than go,
Agreed.
Glover or Hill.
And it's just because of the floor, right? If I'm trying to capture floor in a cash game, the Moreno-Figueiredo fight, I think there's a pretty good chance it goes to the judges' scorecards. We've seen these guys fight, and the pace is pretty high. I think you're getting yourself a real floor there. The Glover-Jamal Hill fight is so hard because somebody's going to score really big and somebody's going to score very low in that matchup. So for cash games, I do think it's a little hard to target, but Figueiredo-Moreno, I think, is a good cash game option. Let's get back to talking about some of the cheap fighters. And we gave out a couple picks for fighters that at least we thought had the best chance to win, who are cheap. But now, who are the highest upside punt plays that you're looking at in tournaments? So when we're talking about below Glover, so Ishmael Bonfim, and I guess we don't have to talk about that fight as much because we already hit on that before, but Daniel Marcos, Paul Craig, Monir Lazez, Mauricio Shogun Hua, who are the highest upside cheap fighters in tournaments that have finishing equity?
I think the first fight of the night, the Daniel Marcos Oliveira fight, like it's not the highest level fight. So I don't think it's going to be a very popular fight either because people don't want to lock in, a fight in the first, right at lock and then be dead, if you only play 1 to 3 lineups. But with it not being super high level, you know what I mean? Like it could go either way. Marcos, he had won a decision on Dana White's Contender Series. He had a knockdown. He landed 86 significant strikes. He defended 11 of 13 takedowns. He has pretty good metrics here. Oliveira is coming off a miserable loss to Tony Gravely. He got absolutely dominated on the mat, got taken down 11 times. Oliveira did attempt, 4 submission attempts from his back, but, I don't know. Like, I don't really see, like, that speaks to how low level this fight is if Marcos is the underdog here with Oliveira coming off a miserable loss like that. So I think, whether you think Oliveira or Marcos wins here, I don't think, Marcos is going to get completely dominated here. I think he has some sneaky finishing upside as well. You look at the other fighters in this range, like Monir Lazez against Gabriel Monfils, I think is going to be a popular target just for price based on his odds. He survived against Abdul Al-Zak Hassan, you know what I mean? So Bonfim is a talented guy. He has a lot of finishes on his card, on his resume, but I think Lazez is well-rounded. He survived, these tougher fighters. I think it's a fight he could win here. Again, they're underdogs for a reason. You're not expecting them to win. Can they win? Yes. Same with Shogun Hua. Like if he survives the first onslaught, like Ihor Porteria, with a loss would be cut from the UFC. So Who could I think who is a good GPP target just for the sense that like Poteria could absolutely just nuke him in the first 5 minutes. But if he survives, Hua can, wrestle a little bit, maybe get some control time, ground and pound there. I think he can put up, 75, 80 points if he wins the decision. Then Bruno Ferraro, like we talked about, I think I like him as well. I think he has power. He's kind of short for the division. He's giving up height and reach to Gregory Rodriguez, but like we talked about earlier, Rodriguez, cardio issues, durability issues. I think Ferrer might have a moment there. Lacerdo against Stamen. I think there's some sneaky submission upside there, but again, like I don't really want to rely on in this range to pick winners. But there are a couple guys who I think compared to last week, there are a lot more guys that are live in this range.
Yeah, and a lot of high variance fights. I agree with you. Shogun, that fight is really stupid from a standpoint of I assumed 3 times he was retiring after fights. I thought when I thought he was for sure retiring was after he beat when was his fight against Nogueira
It was a couple of years ago, let me say.
I think 3 years ago at this point. I thought for sure, that was a fight, kind of like an aging veterans fight. It was a good one for both of them to go out on. Right? It was a split decision. It was 2.5, 3 years ago. I thought both of them were going to retire after that
July
fight.
2020.
Yeah, and then he just kept kind of fighting. For some reason, he did multiple fights with Paul Craig. Draw the first time, then he gets KO'd by Paul Craig in the second one and tapped due to strikes. And when you think about the history of Shogun Rua and how tough he's been throughout his career, the fact that he tapped due to strikes is a real sign of where he's at right now in terms of his decline. So, and then they had him that miserable fight against OSP the last time out also.
So bad.
But I mean, if he wins, it's going to be so ugly. This could be Poteria gasses out in 3 minutes and then it's just really low output striking and Shogun kind of pushes him up against the cage. I think he's live for the win, but I'm a little wary of how well he's going to score if he wins on DraftKings. I think it'd just be really low output.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a pretty low score. We'll look over his fight against Little Nog, right? He landed 2 takedowns, 78 strikes, 54 significant strikes at 3 minutes control time. He didn't score great there. So you're kind of looking at something similar, 65 to 75 points, unless he, Poteria gasses out so bad he finishes him. But that would be a meme if Poteria got finished by Shogun in 2023.
Yeah, and by the way, because you mentioned Bruno Ferreira before, we have 5 fighters projected for less than 10% ownership. Mel Costa, Bruno Ferreira, who spells his name with too many N's. Then we've got Neil Magny, we've got Zarafern, and we've got Shamil Abdurakhimov. Of those fighters, my favorite is Bruno Ferreira. Number 1, I think he has the most win equity of any of those fighters. Not that I'm picking him to win. I think Gregory Rodriguez wins this fight far more often than not. But I think Bruno Ferreira, just because of the way Gregory Rodriguez fights, if Rodriguez decides to wrestle and grapple in this fight, I think he wins pretty easily. You know what Gregory Rodriguez doesn't like to do? Wrestle and grapple. He likes to go there and throw hands and just make fights higher variance than they should be. He could really be a killer if he relied on his grappling and his jiu-jitsu more. But just because I think this is going to be a fight where they're trading on the feet, I think Ferreira is live for a knockout. And by the way, these are the fighters I'm comparing him to. I'm comparing to Mel Costa. I'm comparing him to Zarafern. I'm comparing him to Abdurakhimov. Of those fighters, I think Ferreira has the most win equity, and I think he's the highest potential score in a victory. So Ferreira, I'm about double the field to at that really low ownership, 7%. He's in 14% of my lineups right now. That's a spot I like getting to. Seems like you're on the same page with what you said before, but any of those other really, really low-owned fighters that you're gravitating towards at all?
Under 7,400, it's kind of a mess. Bruno is fine. Lacerda maybe has some sneaky submission upside. Some people are high on Magny. I just don't think it's a good matchup. Lauren Murphy is just in a brutal matchup. Sarah Farine, if she knew how to use her height and reach, maybe, but she doesn't. And then, Shahil Abdurakhimov. It's really ugly under 7,400. So yeah, I'm gravitating towards Bruno as well.
Yeah, and as for the other ones, so here, the issue with a couple other fighters. Neil Magny, even if he wins, I don't expect him to score particularly well. Zarafern, just absolute garbage. I guess the reason that you could consider her, though, would just be that she is the easiest matchup of any of these cheap fighters. Josiane Nunez also is not particularly good.
She's tiny.
But It's just Zara Farron is just particularly awful, like incredibly awful. So that's the reason why I look at Zara Farron, and it's just she's so bad that it's hard for me to consider rostering her at all. I think that Nunes probably gets her out of there in the first round. And these numbers, these are like the worst metrics I've ever seen on a fighter. She lands 1.98 significant strikes per minute, Farron. She absorbs 6.61. For every strike she lands, she's getting hit with like 3.5 back. That's terrible. Her striking defense, 39%. Also, the lowest I think I've ever seen in a women's MMA fight. Her takedown average, she's never landed a takedown before. Takedown defense, she successfully defends 50% of takedowns. All the numbers here are terrible. We haven't seen Nunes really do it in the UFC at all yet. I think she has a pretty easy path to victory if she just decides to wrestle here and takes her down and just smashes Farron on the ground as well. I don't know that's what she's going to do because we've never seen her do it in the UFC. But it's for all those reasons, it's really hard for me to consider Farron. The highest priority there for me, like I said, is going to be Bruno Ferreira. Hard to consider Shamil just because he's fighting against Jailton Almeida. Lauren Murphy. I guess one thing that we could... Murphy, by the way, is the most popular of these fighters. She's projected for 12% ownership. The only thing really working in her favor, back surgery for Jessica Andrade. Maybe that plays some sort of a factor. I tend to think it isn't going to, though. But I'm not really liking Lauren Murphy. Anybody else you're willing to take shots on here?
Like Magny, I guess, like people are steaming him. I just really like Gilbert Burns here. Farine, I kind of agree that she's terrible, and she is, but like she has a massive height and reach advantage here. Her biggest weakness is wrestling defense. I don't think Nunes is going to wrestle. So if she like can keep her on the outside, which is another problem, she probably won't be able to. She, a punching bag has better defense than she does, but like she uses her jab, maybe she can get you, 65, 70 points in decision victory. Like Nunes isn't no world beater here. Do I think Nunes wins? Oh yeah. I'm just looking for reasons to punt down to 6,700 to fit some of these top guys. And Murphy, she's tough. She grinds out these weird split decision wins. Lacerda, I like Cody Stamann. Lacerda maybe can get a submission, but I don't think he would score well in there. Costa against Thiago Moises is outclassed everywhere. So yeah, I have a hard time going below Munir Lazzez today.
Yeah, so Munir Lazzez at 7,400. We didn't really spend too much time talking about him, and I was kind of talking more about some of the low price range. But I'm with you, Munir Lazzez. I think he's somebody to take shots on in tournaments. Everything else just because of win equity, right? If you're looking at some of the odds to win the fight, he's around plus 140. Compare that to Mel Costa, who's $200 cheaper and is a plus 300 underdog. If you're just basing this on the betting lines and who has win equity, there's clearly a better chance of Munir Lazzez winning than some of the fighters priced around him. Paul Craig is a plus 160 underdog to Lazzez's plus 140. Like I said, Mel Costa plus 300. And then you got Shogun plus 180 right there at Munir Lazzez's compared to his 140. So I think that relative to those fighters around him, if you need somebody for cash games at this price point, I think Lazzez is the option.
Yeah.
Can't feel great about it because another guy who I think that there's a pretty big potential grappling and wrestling advantage for Gabriel Bonfim. Could be an issue if he takes us to the mat, but there's massive concerns with all of these cheap fighters, and Munir Lazzez is the safest amongst a group of fighters that are just not particularly safe. Are there any other fighters on this low end that we haven't talked about that you have takes on?
We talked about Johnny Walker, but we haven't really talked about Paul Craig. I hate relying on triangles from your back, but if anyone is going to fall into that trap, it's Johnny Walker. You know what I mean? So I don't want to be taking shots on Paul Craig, but you kind of if you're making 150, it would be irresponsible not to have a little bit of Paul Craig just for that, Johnny Walker being an absolute idiot and falling into a triangle. Do I think that's going to happen? No, I think Walker gets him out of there. But if Walker doesn't, I don't know. This fight could be an absolute scene. And Paul Craig could come away with a third round triangle after he got his ass kicked for 13 minutes. You know what I mean? So Paul Craig's just there because he has some finishing upside. I think Munir Lazzez for cash games is the safest option down there. Shogun Hua for GPPs if he survives the 5 minutes. Bruno Ferreira has the best knockout upside, I would say, of the cheaper guys.
Yeah, and also just question, because somebody, who is it? Usman in chat is saying, have you watched MMA? He's saying that Josiane Nunes isn't good, question mark. I mean, it's all relative, right? Is she a better fighter than a lot of regional fighters? Yes. Like, is she good compared to me? Yes. But is she ever going to be ranked?
No.
I'm the most likely scenario here, 2 years from now, is Nunes on the UFC? Is she still on the roster? I tend to think probably not. She's going to lose when she steps up in competition. She's massively undersized for the weight class. She doesn't really have many weapons other than a left hook. She's very aggressive, but I just think she's going to lose if she has any sort of step up in competition. This isn't that fight, though. She's fighting an absolute trash fighter in Zara Farron, who does not belong on the UFC roster whatsoever. She's 0-2 in the UFC. Lost both those fights by fairly quick finishes.
Yeah, she's fighting a soccer mom.
Yeah, and also, don't get this misconstrued. Nunes, I'm picking to win this fight easily. But in the future, going forward, Nunes is probably somebody I'm looking to fade. Like, she was in a somewhat competitive fight against Ramona Pascal, where Ramona Pascal was able to take her down multiple times. Not a great look.
Yeah. I mean, we have to talk about these low-end options. Like, obviously, Nunes is the second most expensive fighter on the card because she has high probability of winning. We just have to, play devil's advocate for a little bit here. Like, there is a path to victory. This isn't going to just be like, oh yeah, Nunes, this isn't like a WWE squash match, you know what I mean? But like, it could look like that, but the matchmakers made it for a reason, you know what I mean?
All right, we are approaching lock right now, guys. If you haven't done it yet, do us a big favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Once again, shout out to PrizePicks for sponsoring the show. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Good luck tonight.
Good luck, everybody.